I used to believe betrayal came like lightning, sudden, blinding, impossible to prepare for. But in truth, it comes quietly. It seeps into the cracks of your life, slips beneath your skin, and waits. By the time you realize it's there, it's already poisoned everything you thought you could trust. My name is Claire. I'm 38 years old, and this is the story of how the people closest to me, my own husband and my own sister, taught me what it truly means to be broken. And how against all odds I found the strength to break them back. For most of my adult life, I lived the way I thought a good woman should. I married young to Daniel, a man whose ambition could fill any room. He was handsome in that polished, untouchable way that drew people to him. I was drawn too, though what pulled me in wasn't his charm, but his hunger. He wanted the world, and I believed I could help him build it. While he chased deals and climbed ladders, I kept our life running. I was the one making the late-night meals when he came home too tired to speak, the one who handled Bill's birthdays and the silent work of keeping two people alive together. We were a team, or at least I thought we were. I still remember the morning I found the first crack. It was small, almost laughable at first. Lipstick. A faint smear of deep red on the collar of his white shirt. I stood in the laundry room staring at it, my fingers trembling against the fabric, trying to convince myself it was mine. But I don't wear red. I never have. I folded that shirt and put it away without a word, because that's what I did back then. I buried the evidence of my doubts beneath silence. But silence grows heavy. It presses on your chest until you can't breathe. Soon there were late nights that stretched into early mornings, trips that lasted longer than they should have, the smell of perfume that clung to him long after business dinners. Each time I told myself I was imagining it, that Daniel was just tired, stressed, distracted. That marriage was hard work and I had to be patient. But deep down I knew, my body knew, a woman always knows. The night the truth finally surfaced, I wasn't even looking for it. My sister Emily had come over for dinner. She was younger than me by 3 years, beautiful with a laugh that could disarm anyone. She'd always been the golden child in our family. Where I was steady and dependable, she was wild and radiant. I envied her sometimes, but I loved her more. At least I thought I did. That evening, Daniel was unusually attentive to her. He poured her wine before mine. He laughed at jokes that weren't funny. His eyes lingered on her just a little too long. And for the first time I saw something I couldn't unsee. It wasn't just another woman. It was her. Later that night, when I went to clear the dishes, I returned to find them whispering on the balcony. Emily's hand was on his arm, his head bent too close to hers. I froze in the doorway, my heart hammering so loudly I was sure they could hear it. But they didn't. Or maybe they did and didn't care. That was the moment something inside me shattered so completely I thought I might collapse. My husband, my sister, the two people I trusted most in this world, laughing together, sharing something that was supposed to belong only to me. I didn't confront them that night. No. I smiled. I played the part. I kissed my husband's cheek as Emily left, pretending not to notice the way her eyes flickered with guilt. I let Daniel hold me in bed as though nothing had changed, though his touch felt like fire against my skin. But I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breath beside me, and I made a promise to myself. They thought they had broken me. They thought they could take everything I had built and leave me with nothing. But they were wrong. They had no idea who I truly was when pushed to the edge. Because betrayal, I realized, isn't just pain, it's power. And I was going to use every ounce of that power to destroy them both. The next morning, I woke to the soft gray of a Seattle sky and the steady rhythm of Daniel's breathing beside me. It struck me how ordinary betrayal looks in daylight, coffee dripping, the shower hissing, his tie knotted, exactly how I taught him the first year we were married. He kissed my forehead on his way out and said, "Don't wait up," the same way he'd said it 100 times. The words slid through me like ice water. I nodded and smiled because I had learned quickly that the quietest room is where the loudest truths can be gathered. Once the door clicked shut, I sat at our kitchen table and made a list. It wasn't a list of rage, it was a list of order accounts, logins, calendars, places he said he'd be. I added a second column for Emily, Her favorite bars, the gym where she taught Pilates 2 nights a week, the boutique hotel she swore was just for girls' nights because it had good lighting for selfies. I stared at both columns until the names began to blur, not from doubt, but from the precise focus that arrives when your heart has decided to become a blade. I started with the smallest thing time. I began tracking Daniel's phone location, not through anything illegal, simply by remembering the ridiculous way he'd once shown me find my like a magician revealing a trick. Couples share everything until they don't. Within days, the map began to tell the story I already knew. The dots clustered near Emily's apartment on Thursdays. The dots drifted to the same hotel on Tuesdays. The dots pulsed at the edges of my life like a heartbeat that no longer belonged to me. I saved screenshots. I printed receipts that he left in his pockets, careless, almost bored with his own lies. There was a bar tab with 2 drinks that tasted like candy and regret. There was a florist charge for peonies, Emily's favorite, not mine. Each small paper cut narrowed my breathing, and yet each one steadied my hands. At night, I rehearsed not the confrontation, but the silence I would need to hold long enough to make something larger than revenge, something like justice. I kept seeing our mother's face whenever I closed my eyes. She'd always said the world would make room for Emily. It was a prophecy and a prison. When we were kids, I was the one who learned how to set the table while our mother curled my sister's hair for dance recitals. When Dad left, I became the one who waited at the window with the porch light on, while Emily told jokes to fill the room he'd vacated. I thought I had made peace with that imbalance. I thought I could hold a lifetime of second place if it meant our family didn't break further. But the night on the balcony watching my sister's hand close around the life I had tended, I felt the old ache wake up like a sleeping animal. It wasn't just my marriage they had taken. It was every quiet apology I had ever offered the world for wanting anything at all. The first twist arrived the following week, wrapped not in scandal, but in paper. A letter from the bank about the house addressed to both of us. I almost tossed it onto the stack of bills, but a single line caught me. Peer the amended deed of trust. Amended. My heart skittered. I read the paragraph twice, then a third time before my vision cleared enough to understand. 2 months earlier, while I was planning his birthday and calling restaurants, he never returned to Daniel had refinanced without telling me. Certain assets once jointly held now seemed to live in a gray space, an arrangement that looked harmless on paper but felt like a door being shut without sound. I set the letter down and laughed once, a dry sound that didn't belong to me. It was almost elegant the way he had moved money like a chess piece while kissing my cheek goodnight. If this was a game, I needed a better board. So I called the person I swore I would never ask for help again, my Aunt May. She was not our mother's sister by blood, but by a kind of stubborn love, and she had kept the ledgers for a dozen small businesses across the city since before I was born. When I told her everything in a voice I barely recognized, she didn't gasp or scold. She listened, tapped her pen, and then said, "Bring me every paper and every story. We'll sort it." I arrived that afternoon with a tote bag that felt like it held 100 pounds of unsaid things. Aunt May made tea and spread everything across her dining table, in neat rows, receipts, printouts, notes, in my careful handwriting. Watching her, I felt 12 again, the age I learned that grown-ups could shatter without warning, and someone still had to make dinner. By dusk, patterns began to appear. So did names I didn't recognize. Shell companies, short-term accounts, a trust established in my husband's mother's maiden name. I felt sick. "He's making himself smaller on paper," Aunt May murmured more to the columns than to me. Not unusual for men who think they're about to be caught at something. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. "So he expects a divorce," I said. Saying the word made the room tilt. Aunt May looked up at me, her eyes so steady it hurt. "He expects to control it." She paused. "Will you let him?" I thought of the way Emily's laughter had slipped into my house like a song I had never chosen. I thought of the porch light burning out the night Dad didn't come back, and how I'd replaced the bulb myself because someone had to. I thought of my mother who taught me to braid hair and smooth tablecloths and never ask for too much. No, I said, and the word felt like a match struck inside my chest. No, I won't. The next steps were simple in shape and brutal in practice. I hired a lawyer, someone Aunt May trusted, a woman who didn't flinch at the way my voice shook when I said my husband and my sister in the same sentence. We documented everything. We took photographs of nothing empty hotel rooms, 2 coffee cups cooling on a windowsill, my own reflection looking back at me with eyes I hardly knew. We gathered evidence without chasing it because greed has a way of walking into the camera on its own. Meanwhile, I invited Emily to brunch. She arrived late, sun-kissed and soft with apology. She talked about a new class she was teaching. She asked about Daniel as though he weren't the gravity binding the lies between us. I watched her stir sugar into her latte and realized with a quiet horror that she had convinced herself this was love. That made it worse somehow. Selfishness wrapped in romance is still selfishness. Do you ever think I asked my voice light that we carry our mother's mistakes like heirlooms? Emily blinked, not following. What mistakes, I almost told her then. I almost shattered the table between us with the truth I'd been swallowing. But I thought of the plan that needed patience and the ending I wanted to earn. So I smiled and said nothing. When we hugged goodbye, she smelled like peonies. For the first time in months, I did not cry on the drive home. That night, I opened a box I hadn't touched in years, the one that held my father's letters, the ones he sent after he left. I read them all looking for a sentence that could redeem the way the world keeps choosing itself over women who keep it alive. I didn't find redemption. I found something else, a line about a savings bond he'd purchased in my name the year I turned 10, so you'll have something of your own, honey. It was small, almost nothing by now, but holding it made my hands stop shaking. A seed is still a seed, even if you plant it late. And so the gala became my garden. Daniel's firm hosted it every spring, all glass and champagne and speeches that pretended to be humble. He had already marked me as busy that night in our shared calendar, without asking a choice so arrogant it felt like a dare. I changed the entry back to attending. I bought a dress the color of storm clouds and a pair of earrings that flashed only when I turned my head. I would walk into that room with every quiet thing I had learned and every loud thing they had done. I would not scream. I would not beg. I would simply tell the truth so clearly that the room itself would have to choose which way to lean. The night of the gala arrived like thunder held in the air, thick with expectation. The hotel ballroom shimmered with chandeliers, the air heavy with perfume and the rustle of gowns. I stood at the entrance for a moment, clutching my storm-colored dress at the waist, feeling the pulse in my throat. My reflection in the mirrored doors startled me, not the woman who had folded shirts and paid bills and waited up for a man who never came home, but someone sharper, someone carved clean by betrayal. I walked in alone. The sound of laughter and the clink of glasses rose around me, but all I could hear was the steady drum of my own heartbeat. Daniel was already on stage greeting investors with that polished smile that had once made me proud and now only made me nauseous. Emily sat at a table near the front, dazzling in a silk gown I had seen hanging in my own closet months earlier. She wore it as though it had always belonged to her. My stomach twisted, but I kept moving. Every step felt like pressing my hand harder into a bruise, testing how much pain I could bear before I broke. I didn't break. I sat at a table where I could see them both clearly, and when Daniel finally noticed me, the flicker in his eyes was worth every sleepless night. For a split second, the mask slipped. He hadn't expected me. He hadn't invited me. Emily's smile faltered too, the corners of her mouth stiffening. In that moment, I knew they weren't afraid of hurting me. They were afraid of being seen. And tonight I intended to make sure everyone saw. The speeches began, Daniel praising his partners, boasting about the company's meteoric growth. His words washed over me like static until I caught one sentence that pierced through. Our success is built on trust. I almost laughed aloud, but I bit down on the inside of my cheek until I tasted iron. Trust. The words sat on the ballroom air like a lie dressed in velvet. When the applause faded, I stood. My chair scraped against the marble floor, a sound louder than any music. Heads turned. Daniel froze on the stage, his hands still raised in a gesture of gratitude that looked ridiculous now. I walked to the front, each step echoing in my chest. My voice was steady when I spoke, though my hands trembled at my sides. "I'm Claire," I said, "Daniel's wife. Some of you know me, most of you don't. That's because for years I was invisible by his choice and mine. I let him shine, I let him build, I let him take all the credit. But tonight I think you should know what else he's been building." A ripple of confusion passed through the room. Daniel opened his mouth, but I raised a hand, and to my surprise he stopped. Maybe it was the tone in my voice, or maybe he sensed that the woman he used to dismiss had finally become someone he couldn't control. I laid out the facts, each one sharp and undeniable. The hidden accounts, the refinanced house, the business trips that landed him at my sister's apartment, the receipts, the screenshots, the records Aunt May had helped me piece together. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just told the truth one line after another, until the silence in that ballroom became so deep it hurt. When I turned to Emily, I didn't raise my voice. I simply said, "You weren't just my sister, you were my friend. And you took the one thing you knew could destroy me because you wanted it for yourself." Her face crumpled, then hardened, then turned away. She couldn't meet my eyes. The golden child dimmed at last. Daniel tried to laugh, tried to smooth it over with charm, but the room had shifted. The investors who once hung on his every word now studied him with narrowed eyes, calculating what kind of man hides lies beneath his empire. "Trust," he had said. "Trust, I thought, is the one thing you can never rebuild once it's gone." The climax came not with a shout, but with the sound of my own voice, steady and clear. "I will not be erased. Not as a wife, not as a woman, not as a sister. You thought betrayal would silence me, but it gave me back my voice." The applause didn't come. There was no standing ovation, just silence, raw and heavy, the kind that follows when the ground shifts beneath everyone's feet. I walked out of that ballroom alone, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt free. Later that night, sitting in the back of a cab, I pressed my forehead to the window and let the city lights blur into gold. I thought of all the women before me, mothers, grandmothers, nameless faces who swallowed their rage and called it survival. I thought of Emily and Daniel clutching at each other in the ruins they had made. And I thought of myself carrying nothing but the truth and realized it was enough. The days after the gala felt like standing in the eye of a storm. Outwardly, everything appeared calm. Daniel still left the house in his pressed suits, his tie knotted perfectly, pretending the world hadn't shifted under his feet. Emily stopped calling altogether, though her silence screamed louder than any denial could. But beneath that surface, calm, the damage was spreading, cracking through the foundations of their carefully constructed lies. I hadn't expected victory to feel so heavy. I thought I'd walk away from that ballroom with my head high, triumphant. Instead, I went home and sat in the dark, my dress pooling around me, trembling with something I couldn't name. Revenge, I realized, isn't sweet. It's bitter sharp and it leaves your mouth dry. The truth had been spoken, but truth alone doesn't heal. It only exposes. The first consequence landed 3 days later. Daniel's company announced a temporary restructuring after several investors pulled out. The press release was polished, but I could read between the lines. The board didn't trust him anymore. His empire had been built on confidence, and I had stripped that away with a handful of receipts and a steady voice. At breakfast, he slammed the paper down on the counter, his jaw tight. He didn't look at me, but his silence was thick with blame. He wanted to say I'd ruined him, but deep down he knew the only person who had ruined him was himself. As for Emily, I heard whispers before I saw her again. Friends told me she'd moved out of her apartment, that Marcus, the man she'd left everything for, had disappeared once the shine wore off. She was living with a friend now, borrowing clothes, avoiding family gatherings. When I finally ran into her at a grocery store, she looked smaller, her golden hair pulled into a careless knot, her eyes darting away when she saw me. I could have walked past. I could have let her fade into the background of my life like a ghost. But something inside me, rage, grief, maybe both, stopped my feet. She froze when I spoke her name. For a moment I saw the sister I used to love, the girl who used to braid my hair before school, the one who cried with me the night our father left. But then I remembered the balcony, her hand on my husband's arm, and the pity inside me curdled into something harder. Why, I asked simply. Not a scream, not an accusation, just that one word. Her mouth opened, closed. Tears filled her eyes. I thought he loved me, she whispered, her voice breaking. I thought I could finally have something of my own. The words hit me like glass shattering inside my chest. Because I knew exactly what it felt like to live your whole life in someone else's shadow, to hunger for something that belonged only to you. But the difference was this: I had never stolen it from her. I had carried my envy quietly buried beneath duty and love. She had turned hers into betrayal. I shook my head. You didn't just take him, Emily. You took me. You took my trust, my belief that blood meant something, and that's something you can't give back. She cried right there between the cereal aisle and the checkout, but I walked away. Some wounds don't close. Some wounds aren't meant to. Weeks turned into months, and slowly the storm settled. Daniel's company survived, but smaller, humbler. His name was no longer spoken with awe at charity dinners, but with caution. Emily drifted further from me, an absence that became permanent, like a limb I'd lost. At first, the emptiness threatened to swallow me, but then I began to fill it with myself. I took the money my father had left me, the bond I'd rediscovered, and invested in something that was mine alone, a small bookshop tucked on a quiet street corner. It was modest, nothing compared to the empire Daniel once commanded, but it was honest. People came not for spectacle, but for stories. And in that shop, surrounded by shelves heavy with words, I began to stitch myself back together. Sometimes customers would ask if I was the Claire from the papers, the woman who had exposed her husband and sister at a gala. I would smile politely, but inside I knew that wasn't who I was anymore. I wasn't just the sum of their betrayal. I was the woman who had survived it. And in survival, I found something stronger than revenge. I found freedom. Revenge had given me power in the moment, but freedom gave me peace. And peace was what I had been craving all along. So if you're listening, if you've been betrayed so deeply, it feels like you'll never breathe again, hear me, you will. Not because they deserve forgiveness, but because you deserve to be whole again. Betrayal may break you, but it also shows you who you truly are. And sometimes in the ruins of what they tried to take you, find the only thing worth keeping: yourself. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched you, if you felt that same ache in your chest, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that dig into the truth of what we survive. And tell me in the comments, have you ever faced betrayal? How did you rise again? I'd love to hear your voice.